So I've made this very rough model. This is just for drawing over. So it doesn't need to be accurate, but it needs to be accurate to how it works. So I've carved this out to fit my thumb nicely. I got this also helped me figure out the ergonomics of how the buttons, where they should be. There's gonna be a little touchpad here. The grip here, I wanted super grippy so that you wouldn't slip out of your hands. And then the zoom over here. And you notice I've actually went over all the corners and drawn with a Sharpie these dark lines. And that's to help me kind of figure out in the drawing where those edges are, because they disappear in the photography. So again, remember this. So I start off and I cut out I take the photos and you can see the backgrounds in there, and I cut them all out and kind of resize them and get them all set up, and then snap some lines. And again, notice I've inked in all these lines right on the model, so that will help me find those edges. It's really hard to find them just with shading. So here's the original layout I did. I took these photos, I put the zoom in maximum and then step away from them so you get less perspective, and then I aligned them all properly. Once I get pretty far along, then I go in and turn that layer down, and then do a nice clean final layer on top that's got all the lines properly adjusted. Trace over it, and you notice I just snap some straight lines so that I can make sure that all the sizes are correct. And I have a grid layer that I use to help me do the lettering, because when you're zoomed in all these different zoom levels, it's hard to tell how far zoomed you're in, so the text tends to be in all these different sizes. So this helps me. Like down here, this one looks like I've used two grids. Okay, so here's my basic line drawing setup, and again, you can kind of see on the camera I've got a heavier outline that goes around the camera, and then finer details, and I've done a double line on all of my transitions so I can get some highlights in there. You can see from the original, the model, the Sharpie lines that I've used, the little markers around the lens really helped me to get that perspective correct, and the circular ellipses. The whole purpose of this was just to get accurate scale and consistent across the different images, and also get these in-use type situations. So here's a student holding the camera, and so you can see how you focus and the scale and how your fans fit and everything. So there's a lot of stuff that you get out of this model. So here I'm just kind of zipping over where we start coloring it in. I block in the main colors and then add highlights and shadows on separate layers. So you can see the shadow that I did, the cast goes into the object. The coloring I did, the opacity of it is solid, so it just blocks out all that layer underneath it. And then I've got more highlights and details. And usually what I do is I turn those highlight layers down. I already molded them together, but I turn them down in opacity so they're not too bright. And then I'll do one more layer with just some super bright highlights, and then that gives a little bit of contrast between the lighter highlights and then those super hot specular highlights. And the colors and stuff, one thing that's kind of interesting is if you go into the color layer, now this I would probably do all this in separate layers, but if I go hue saturation, I could kind of fool around with some different possibilities, but everything changes at once. So in Photoshop you can pick certain colors, but really ideally I would do each color just as a solid on a separate layer, and then one layer of highlights and shadows so that I can control those. Go back to where it was. And so now you can see the whole layout. Oops, I need the picture in the background. This I just took a picture, and again, turn the opacity down so you're not competing against your drawing. It's really just a little highlight, a note, not a detail. And let's go through the video time-lapse, and you can kind of see this in process. So here's, I'm kind of focusing in on the guy down here right now, tracing over all the camera and the details. And I had to add the little top of his head there. I was mentioning before, take the pictures with plenty of room. It's easier to cut down than to add details back in, especially anatomy. So here's the last one. So I'm just working all these different layers, and and then readjusting them later. It's actually a lot better to have a planned layout before you start, because the front view and the back view are at different perspective angles, and I think I would have preferred to have them at the same in the same perspective. I think that would have made the drawing look a little bit better. So now I have all of my assets together, and you'll see I'm going to play through this. You'll see how many times I kind of move things around. I switched the main camera that was colored in front so that the composition would have a kind of central focus. I've got some little images to the side. I tried them on both sides. I keep on moving things around just to try to get the layout to where I like it. And then add all the text is just all handwritten using that grid underlay to help me line it all up and get the spacing correctly. Here as we pan across it, you can see I've also turned down the opacity of the text so that the drawings really pop forward. So everything on that's important is drawn with black, everything else is kind of toned down.